Hey everyone, in this video I want to look at ways we can strengthen our authentication in our user interactions with Azure Active Directory. We talk about Azure AD as these great MFA capabilities, these great passwordless capabilities, but what are some of the things we can do to really level up our types of authentication? Now, if we take a step back, if we look at, well, we have this idea of our user. So we have our user, and obviously we have our Azure Active Directory. So for our particular organization, we have a specific Azure AD tenant. And our user, well, they have an account in that Azure Active Directory. It could be synchronized from an on-premises Active Directory domain services environment using Azure AD Connect. It could be a cloud-only account. But we're going to have some authentication to enable the user to prove they really are who they say they are. Now, we have different levels of this authentication. The worst is just, well, we just have a password. And so for the password, we think, well, frowny, sad, grey face. We really don't like just a password, because a password is what we think of as a network secret. It's some string that I can use anywhere. I can use it at my machine, at another machine, as part of a VPN connection, as part of some maybe web-based access to some resource, but it's just a string. And the problem with that string is, well, there's multiple problems. One, it's susceptible to brute force type attacks. So there's some engine that's just trying different permutations of that string. And given enough time, depending on the complexity, the length of that password, it may guess it. But also it's susceptible to phishing attacks. So that's where there's some social engineering. Someone phones up the user and tries to get that password, gets them to give it to them. Hey, I'm from PC Help Desk. We have some questions, but first, to prove you are who you say you are, please confirm your password to us, or some other type of attack. So it's very susceptible to misuse. So what we like to do is at minimum combine it with something else. We talk about multi-factor authentication, so multiple forms of authentication. There's something I know, like a password or a PIN. Something I have could be my phone, could be a token, could be a certificate based on a card. It could be something I am, a biometric, a 3D scan of my face, a thumbprint, whatever. There's different combinations. So at minimum, and going up levels of happiness, we could think of, well, if I combine this with something like an SMS text message, or slightly better than an SMS text message, some voice-based interaction. So yes, they enter their password, and then they get a text message with maybe a number in it they have to then type in, or a voice-based prompt, something. So that's better than just the password on its own. But then better than those is we start thinking about, well, there's things like the Authenticator application. So then I can have, hey, the Authenticator app in its kind of push mode. So, hey, did you request this authentication? Oh, yes, that was me. It could be some kind of one-time passcode. Now, this could be software-based, or it could be hardware-based. So something else in play there. So now we've got these multiple forms of authentication. This Authenticator app, these one-time passcodes, hey, these are much better. So we're moving up really levels of integrity of that additional authentication. But the best thing we could do is we really don't like that password. So we just get rid of the password. So I can think about no password at all. And we go to passwordless technologies. So that Authenticator app, well, that can also be used in a passwordless capacity. But then I also have things like Windows Hello for Business. So Windows Hello for Business, I have, let's say, my laptop or my PC. It has that trusted platform module, that TPM that's doing cryptographic operations, and that's doing the authentication. Then maybe I just have a PIN to get to that particular device. We have FIDO2 keys. And as part of that, there has to be some interaction with the user. There's some presence between that token and the device. There's also certificate-based authentication. That's being mandated in a lot of government agencies. Hey, I have my card. I have to put it into that card reader. There's a certificate on that, and I'm authenticating with that security. And so these no password at all, well, this is just, I'm so joyous. My hands are up in the air. I'm just yippee. If I can get to this, I really want to do the passwordless. Now, something to think about. When I just think of MFA, I think of interactions with the user. One of the problems we often face is the idea of, well, we prompt them too many times. So one of the huge things I really want to do, I want to avoid MFA fatigue. So what I definitely don't want to do is no per user in false. I don't want to do that. I don't want every time they do anything, they get prompted to do an MFA. They're absolutely going to get fatigued with MFA and not think about it. It's like the old, was it Windows Vista that introduced the user access control? It would prompt you for everything. And so you didn't pay any attention to it. If you do something too often, it doesn't mean anything. We want these prompts for multi-factor authentication to maybe jar us. It's like, wait, this isn't normal. Let me think about why I'm getting this prompt. So I can think what I absolutely want to do is maybe I want to use risk-based. So based on conditional access, integrating with the various protection capabilities, hey, I detect additional risk, then make them do an MFA. Or maybe I'm doing some kind of elevation. Absolutely, then make them do an MFA. And what I want to do is make them engage their brain. I don't want to really just be able to click yes. I want to maybe give some context. Where is this request coming from? I'm not in Australia right now. Why am I getting a prompt from Australia? I'm not using that application. Why is that application prompting for this context? Maybe I'm going to make their brain engage even more so they can't just click yes. I require some kind of matching. So they have to type in a number that's being shown on that actual authentication screen. So I want to give context. I want to maybe make them actually do certain things. So I want to avoid that muscle memory. I want to jar them out of it and make them actually do something. And one of the nice things I can actually now do is I can help enforce that jarring type behavior. I can make Azure AD do some different things. So if we jump over, and what I'm going to start off with here is, now this is the Azure portal. And obviously in the Azure portal, I can go to Azure Active Directory, and we know we have our security. And then from security, we have things like, hey, our conditional access. We have things like authentication methods. But I'm actually going to do the demo just out of the new Entra Admin Center, which has the same options, but it's really focused around identity. So the area that I'm caring about right now is this protect and secure. What I want to look at initially are these authentication methods. So if I'm focused just on that Authenticator application interaction, if I go to my authentication methods, I can see all the ones I have available. Now, firstly, I can tune these, and I'll come back to this in a second. But if I just focus here on the Microsoft Authenticator application, firstly, well, I can enable or disable it. And I can target all users or particular groups. Now for each of those users groups, I do have options. So right now I've got it for any, so I can use it in both the push mode, i.e., hey, something's happening, do you want to accept this from an MFA? And I can use it for passwordless. So I've got it set to any. I could change that, so maybe I can only use it for push, so I couldn't use it for passwordless, or maybe I can only use it for passwordless. But right now, hey, I can use it for either one of those. But what I can also do under configure is I can make them engage the brain. Now, you'll see status, enabled, disabled, or Microsoft managed. With the Microsoft managed, Microsoft will enable this for different tenants over time, but I can absolutely force it right now by setting it to enabled. So what I'm doing is I've enabled this idea of require number matching for push notifications. So rather than that user just being able to push, yes, that's me, and maybe not really think about what's happening, it's going to show them a number on the screen and they have to type that number. But additionally, I'm also enabled to show the application name in push and passwordless notifications. So it will show them what is driving this particular authentication and also show me the geographic location. So they can say, well, I'm not actually in Australia right now. So what does this look like? So if we go and do, for a second, a browser's guest, and let's try and go to the portal. Now what I actually have in here, let's actually jump back just for a quick second. I do have a conditional access policy, and I have one specific to user Bruce Wayne. So only for Bruce Wayne, see poor old Bruce here, and only for the Azure portal, I require them to do MFA. So it's going to always make them do MFA. So I have that granularity with conditional access. So if I jump back over here for a second, so if I go over and say, hey, I want to log on as Bruce. So I have to type in my password, okay. So now I have different options right now because I've registered for all these different types that I can use. So hey, request on my Microsoft Authenticator app, user verification code, text, or call. Now what I want to show you is if I bring up this as well. So let's just share. So you can see my phone. And we'll see, well, what does the user see on this? So if I click, and actually let's just grab this for a second, and we'll use our new Windows capability so we can see both of them at the same time. If I say approve a request, we'll notice, so what's happened over here? Firstly, it's showing me a number. So I have to type in this number. But on my phone, well, it's showing me a location and it's showing me the application. So now as a user, I can't just click, oh yes, I have to actually engage. So I'll type that in. Stay signed in, no. And there, I've done that authentication. So I'm now in and using that. So that's a really nice capability, I'll go back to the screen, to enable me to now give that user more context to everything they're doing. So I can't just click yes, I actually have to pay attention. It's giving me the context. I have to actually go and leverage that. So that's a really nice capability. Now, additionally, you did see there are different authentication options. So what I could actually do is if I go back out of this for a second, and I go and actually look at my authentication methods, you would see, well, I can enable or disable these. So like SMS text messaging sign-on, well, that might be considered less secure. So I only have that enabled for a single user because I'm doing maybe some limited testing. And as you saw, I can also do certain configurations around them. So at a per user, per group level, I could enable various different things within them. So if I think about my overall, my Azure Active Directory, so from the Azure AD level, I can configure, well, what are the authentication that I want to have available, and I can do those at a particular user and group level. Now again, this is configuring across all of Azure AD, what are the available options? It's not anything specific to a certain user or certain scenario. It's, hey, I'm going to make these available. Now I should point out the legacy MFA cloud settings is still there, and users will have the options of kind of the sum of those. So if we were to jump back over to the entry portal for a second, now I do need to click this little show more. And once I click show more, under protect and secure, I now also have multi-factor authentication. And then you have this option of configuring additional cloud-based multi-factor authentication settings. Now, the recommendation really would be to use the newer authentication methods, but just realize if you are configuring here, the user would have the sum, what's configured in either one of these particular policies. So just definitely be aware of that. Now, one of the challenges is, as we saw, so as soon as we get into these, this was all MFA. So regardless of which one I did, I now had this idea of multi-factor authentication, but then they're not equal. Remember, we had a kind of, okay, with SMS or voice, but we really like the Authentication app, we really like one-time passcode, and then we get into these, hey, no password list, which is just fantastic. So while at the Azure AD level, we can configure which authentication methods are available to us, there's going to be times where actually I want to be stricter. If I go to my Azure Active Directory, I can think there might be lots of different cloud applications. So I might have my kind of app one, and maybe this is a super secure, very important application. Then I have some other apps that maybe aren't so secure, and they're all trusting my particular instance of Azure Active Directory. Now for some of those, hey, this really secure one, maybe I want a higher quality of authentication. I'm not okay with an SMS text message or a voice. I want them to use the Azure Authenticator app. I want them to use a FIDO2 key. I want them to use maybe certificate-based authentication. So what's a way in Azure AD that I can enforce a certain set of requirements? Well, common across nearly everything, I have the idea in Azure AD that, well, this fantastic nothing can bypass force field is conditional access. That same technology we really want to use to request MFA. That's where I want to be able to actually drive and configure that. So what I can actually now do is, as part of our conditional access policy, so for app one, I could create a policy specific to app one. So in the configuration, I might say app equals app one, or maybe in the demo, in my case, it's going to be the Azure portal. I could be particular groups of users. I could have various conditions that I'm stipulating, but my grant, say, hey, this is what's required. MFA, actually, no. I don't want it to be that generic that they can use anything they want. Instead, I'm going to say, I require a specific authentication strength. And I'm going to say, I want passwordless. So something that could be used for the password list. So it's not going to let them use an SMS text message. It's not going to let them use a voice call. It's going to need something stronger than that. And this authentication strength is a configuration of my Azure AD. So I have this idea of authentication strengths. At time of recording, there are 3 of them, and I'll show you these, but I can also add custom. And then with custom, for each of the different types of authentication, I tick the ones that I want to be in my particular authentication strength policy. So let's have a look at this. If we jump back over to the portal. So what I'm going to firstly do is if we go to our conditional access, and we're going to change that Bruce MFA portal one. Now again, I'm just targeting a particular user, but realize, and I'm just targeting a particular app, but I could add a whole set of different conditions to this as well. Hey, a higher risk. Hey, I want a better form of authentication. Certain platforms, certain locations, devices. But currently my grant is I require multi-factor authentication. I don't want that. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn on require authentication strength. And then I have 3 options. And these are the built-in 3, but if I add custom ones, they would show as well. So multi-factor authentication is really the same as that other option. But I can also do passwordless multi-factor authentication or phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. So I'm going to pick passwordless, select that, and save it. Now, one of the things I can absolutely do is if I go back over to my authentication methods, we have authentication strengths. And it shows me those 3. So if I have multi-factor authentication, it's giving me this whole list, basically everything, all the things I could use. If I say passwordless, well then it's just those 4. Hello for Business, FIDO2, certificate-based, and Microsoft Authenticator. If I say phishing resistant, it's the same, but I lose the Microsoft Authenticator app. It's only Hello for Business, FIDO2, or certificate-based authentication. And then I can absolutely add my own. And when I add my own, I click a checkbox next to the particular ones I want. Now, you may absolutely have a question at this point. What is the phishing resistant authentication, and why is the Authenticator app missing from it? So remember, the password was a network secret. That help desk person, not really. Oh, I'm phoning up from the help desk. We need to check some things. We need to change your password. Give me your old password. We're going to reset it, or give me your password to prove who I say I am, whatever that is. Well, if that worked and they got the password and they type it in, now it's prompting them for this MFA. Well, if I'm using the Authenticator app, remember technically what happens, it shows the bad actor a number. Hey, I need to further confirm who you are. I've just sent through a test to your Authenticator app. To prove you really are you, I'm showing you a number. I need you to tell me what that number is. Oh, okay, I better tell you the number. It's 42. Bad actor types in 42, and they're away. So the problem is there's a human in that authentication interaction, and realistically, humans are the weak link. They're susceptible to phishing. So even the Authenticator app, which is great, it's susceptible to a phishing attack because ultimately I as a human being are performing an action on some device that is not actually connected to the surface that is performing the authentication, i.e. that bad actor's machine maybe hundreds of miles away. There's no connection. I can just be told to do something, I do it, and then it lets them authenticate. Whereas, if we were to look at these technologies, these are phishing resistant. And why is that? Well, remember, there's a physical machine where I am trying to do the sign-in. So this is the surface of the authentication. With all of these technologies, they have to be connected. Hello for Business, it's the TPM in that machine. A FIDO2 key has to be inserted in the machine and then some gesture. Certificate-based authentication, the card is in that machine. What's not in this equation is the human. They're not involved. There's no opportunity for the human to be duped. Even if they were to put in the FIDO2 key or do something, the attacker's on a completely different machine. It doesn't solve their strong authentication requirement. So these are phishing resistant because the human can't mess it up. I mean, that's fundamentally the point of a phishing resistant authentication. There's no way for the human being in that equation to do the wrong thing. And that's the key point. So that's why we have this additional category where I want it to be resistant even against a more advanced spear phishing attack of that user, where they could be duped. Oh, okay, I'll type in that number to prove I am who I say I am. And then the bad actor is in. So we made that change, remember, for Bruce Wayne. So if we jump back over, actually we jump over to here. So we made the change. So let's actually sign out as Bruce Wayne, and we'll sign in again. Now remember before, what did Bruce Wayne have? Bruce Wayne before had all those different options of how they could sign in. So what we're going to do is we'll do exactly the same thing again. So I'll type in the password. But now look at my options. I've lost SMS text, phone, all the other things. The only thing I can actually do now is approve request on my Microsoft Authenticator app. Okay. And that's me signed in. I lost all of the other options. And I lost all of the other options, remember, because in the policy, I changed it from MFA to I only grant if I have passwordless MFA. Now, the other thing we definitely should, I guess, point out is, if we sign out one more time, the nicer thing now available to that user, because I did enable the Authenticator app for passwordless sign-in, is I have the option as Bruce, other ways to sign in. If I click that, I can now approve a request on my, I'm not typing in my password at all. I get that same experience. And notice what I can do on the Authenticator app. I can still require like a biometric, so it's checking I am who I say I am. I never typed in my password. So now I, as a company, could absolutely, once I've got this rolled out and it's working correctly, I could go and scramble all my user passwords. So people can't even use a password. They don't know it. They have to use passwordless. So that's completely open to me now to just enable that approach for my organization. So I hope that makes sense. I hope when we think about that, there's more than just MFA. There are these different levels. So sure, some MFA is going to defeat most things, but they're not equal. A text message is kind of the worst level. A phone's a bit better because there's a bit more interaction between that. But then we get to Authenticator apps, one-time passcodes, be it from a software token or a hardware token. But then ideally, we just get rid of that password altogether, and we can have things like the Authenticator app, Hello for Business, FIDO2 key, certificate-based authentication. And I can now drive different strengths of authentication depending on the application. I say, hey, this is a very sensitive application, or I'm doing certain types of elevation. I want a stronger level of auth for that. And there is this idea of the phishing resistant, where the human is just out, the human can't make the mistake. Because if I think about, there's no ability to phish the authentication because that device, TPM in the machine, or that token, that card, has to actually have a direct interaction with the authentication service, that authentication point. So the user can't make a mistake in this world. So that's really that key goal. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you start doing things like giving users context, if they're using remote desktops, and for example, that remote desktop was maybe in Azure or a different building, obviously the location's not going to be where they physically reside. So just a little bit of education, if I do start showing context to explain to users, hey, look, if you're in a VPN session, if you're in a remote desktop, your location may show as this. This is still okay, but it's not from your actual physical location when I'm using remote desktops, VPN type connections. So maybe a little bit of education to avoid panic at the users. But I hope this helped. I really do think that ability now to give better context, to make the user's brain snap out of it and engage when I have to actually go and type in a number. And now with conditional access, remember an Azure AD Premium P1 feature, using those authentication strengths can really up our all-up security game. So I hope that was useful. As always, until next video, take care.